The noise that wakes you isn't a sound. It's a physical assault. A multi-tonal shriek of tortured metal and blaring vox horns that rips through the smog-choked air of the hive city. A sound so immense it vibrates deep in your bones and rattles the fillings in your teeth. This is the morning siren, your alarm clock. There's no snooze button on planetary scale damnation. For a fleeting, blissful moment, you were nothing. Now, you are awake, and you are in the Imperium of Man. Congratulations. Your bed is a slab of cold, pitted metal bolted to the wall. Your mattress is a thin sack filled with something lumpy and vaguely organic, and your one comfort is a thin, perpetually damp blanket that smells of mold and recycled sorrows. You open your eyes, not to the gentle morning light, but to the perpetual, rust-colored gloom of your hab unit. Think of it as a walk-in closet. If that closet was also a plumbing junction and home to 3 other people you actively avoid making eye contact with. They are already stirring in their own bunks. They're coughing a wet, percussive rhythm that serves as the hab block's morning anthem. These aren't your friends. They aren't your family. They are simply competitors for the same stale, recycled oxygen. A single grime-caked light orb flickers overhead, casting long, dancing shadows across the weeping stains on the metal walls. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, ozone from failing electrics, and the pungent, ever-present smell of corrosion. The only window is a tiny reinforced porthole that looks directly out onto another wall, just a few feet away, crisscrossed with leaky pipes and thick, greasy cables. There is no sky here. There is only the hive. Next on the agenda is your morning hygiene routine. You stumble out of your bunk and join the silent, shuffling queue for the ablutions block. This is a communal trough fed by a single, sputtering pipe. The water that dribbles out is lukewarm, rust-colored, and carries the faint, coppery tang of the thousands of citizens who have used it before you this cycle. Soap? That's a luxury reserved for off-world dignitaries and the obscenely wealthy. You cup the grimy water in your hands and splash it on your face, not to get clean, but to scrape off the thickest layer of yesterday's grime and shock yourself into a higher state of alertness. For a moment, you catch your reflection in a shard of polished scrap metal someone has nailed to the wall. Gaunt, pale, with the same haunted, exhausted look as everyone else. The Imperium's signature look. And now, for the breakfast of champions. You shuffle to the nutrient dispenser, a spigot on the wall that hums with grim purpose. You place your standard-issue tin bowl underneath and watch as a gray, viscous substance oozes out. This is your meal. It has the consistency of wet cement and the flavor of absolutely nothing, accented by a faint chemical bitterness that reminds you it was probably synthesized in a vat the size of a building. You try not to think about the recycled organic matter it's made from. It's not food, it's fuel. It's not meant to be enjoyed. It's designed to provide just enough calories to keep you from collapsing into the machinery during your 14-hour shift. You eat it quickly, mechanically, the taste of despair coating your tongue. Congratulations. You've successfully survived the first 30 minutes of your day. You've been jolted from unconsciousness, reminded of your squalid existence, and nourished with industrial paste. You might think that after a morning like this, things can only get better. Oh, you sweet, naive soul. The day has barely begun, because now you have to get to work. And in a hive city, the morning commute isn't just a traffic jam. It's your first real survival test of the day. You step out of your hab block, and the world opens up into a vision of industrial insanity. There is no street. There is no ground. There is only a narrow, grated metal walkway bolted to the side of your hab stack, and a sheer, dizzying drop that plummets for miles into a hazy, smog-choked abyss. Down there, in the perpetual darkness, are the lights of the underhive. You try not to look. The wind whips around you, a physical force that threatens to peel you from the walkway, carrying with it the metallic tang of rust and the distant thunderous roar of the city's industry. This is your bus stop. You join a crowd of thousands, a dense, silent river of gray-clad workers, all packed onto a massive iron platform that juts out into the open air. Everyone is pressing forward, a slow, inexorable tide of bodies. An elbow digs into your ribs. Someone's foot stomps on yours. There are no apologies. Complaining is a sign of weakness, and weakness gets you shoved. Shoved here doesn't mean you fall onto the pavement. It means you become a brief, screaming footnote in the hive's daily casualty report. The platform shudders as more people cram aboard, its groans of protest lost in the howling wind. Forget your cramped subway car or waiting for a bus in the rain. This is rush hour 40K style, where the primary danger isn't being late, it's being gravity-checked into oblivion. Then you see it, your ride. It emerges from the smog, a monstrous, rust-streaked cage of iron bars, the size of a hab block itself, suspended from a thick, greasy cable that stretches up into the unseen heights of the spire. Think of it less as a vehicle and more as a giant, rusty tea-strainer for people. It docks with your platform with a deafening screech of metal on metal, and the gate grinds open. The crowd surges. There's no orderly queue, no please mind the gap. It's a desperate, frantic scramble to get inside before the gate grinds shut again. You're carried along by the force of the mob, your feet barely touching the floor, a single thought dominating your mind. Don't fall. Don't get crushed. You make it inside, pressing yourself against the cold, grimy bars. The cage is packed so tight you can't lift your arms. The collective smell of damp clothing and nervous sweat is suffocating. Then, with a gut-wrenching lurch, the cage begins its journey. It doesn't move forward. It sways and drops, swinging out over the chasm before another massive winch yanks it sideways on its terrifying journey across the hive. You grip a bar, your knuckles white, as the cage swings like a pendulum from hell. Below you, the city is a blur of tarnished metal and flickering lights. You pass other cages, filled with other anonymous workers, their faces pale and grim, all sharing the same silent prayer to the God Emperor that the cable holds for one more day. The journey takes 20 minutes, but it feels like an eternity. It's 20 minutes of swaying, of the wind screaming through the bars, of the cage groaning and creaking with every movement. It's 20 minutes of being acutely aware that your life depends entirely on a single, overworked piece of machinery built centuries ago by people who are long dead. You finally lurch to a halt at your destination, a platform identical to the one you left, just miles across the chasm, leading directly into the gaping maw of a manufactorum. You spill out with the rest of the human tide, your legs unsteady, your ears ringing. You survived the commute. But as the soul-crushing noise of the factory hits you like a physical blow, a new kind of dread settles in. The commute was just the preamble. The real work, the mindless, dangerous, soul-destroying labor, is about to begin, and the person in charge of your productivity doesn't care if you've had a rough morning. In fact, he's counting on it. The moment you step off the walkway, the factory assaults you. It's not just noise, it's a living, breathing entity of sound, a solid wall of thunderous, percussive impacts, the high-pitched scream of tortured metal, and the deep, guttural roar of furnaces that have been burning since your great-grandparents were born. The air is a toxic cocktail you can taste. It's thick with airborne metal shavings, greasy smoke, and the sharp, acidic stench of industrial lubricants. It coats your throat and makes your eyes water. Welcome to your office. There's no motivational poster on the wall, just a crudely stenciled pictogram of a worker being mangled by a cog with the word "obey" underneath. Your workstation is waiting. It's a titanic hydraulic press, a behemoth of soot-stained iron and brass nicknamed the Emperor's Mercy by some long-dead, deeply ironic worker. Your job for the next 14 hours is beautifully simple. A conveyor belt delivers a thick plate of raw plasteel. You grab it, position it perfectly on the press bed, and hit the activation rune. The press descends with the force of a meteor strike, shaping the metal with a deafening crunch. Then you pull the newly stamped component out and slide it onto another conveyor. Rinse and repeat, every 10 seconds, for 14 hours. There are no ergonomic considerations. There is no OSHA. The only safety feature is a faded yellow line painted on the floor, a charmingly optimistic suggestion of a safe zone. You've seen what happens when someone's timing is off by a fraction of a second. The press doesn't distinguish between plasteel and bone. The machine just keeps working, and the foreman just calls for a new recruit from the underhive. Speaking of management, let's talk about your boss. He's not a manager, he's a taskmaster prime, a hulking brute of a man who patrols a raised gantry overlooking your section. He doesn't do performance reviews or offer constructive feedback. His primary tool for employee motivation is a long, crackling shock maul. If your pace slows, if you look distracted, if you so much as sneeze at the wrong moment, you'll feel a jolt of agonizing electricity snap you back to attention. He doesn't know your name or your designation number. You are simply Unit 734 Press Operator. To him, you are less a person and more a biological component of the machine, one that can be easily stimulated or, if necessary, replaced. The hours bleed into one another, a monotonous, soul-crushing cycle of noise and motion. Lift, place, press, remove. Lift, place, press, remove. Your muscles scream in protest, a fire burning in your back and shoulders. The constant, thunderous noise becomes a dull, permanent roar in your ears, a tinnitus you'll carry with you to your grave. You stop thinking. You have to. To think is to realize the utter futility of your existence, that you are spending your one short life creating a tiny, insignificant part for a war machine you'll never see, for a war on a planet you've never heard of, for an emperor you only know through fear. You become an automaton, a flesh and blood extension of the press. That's how you survive. A sudden, piercing whistle cuts through the din, signaling the mid-shift break. 14 hours is a long time to go without fuel, even for a disposable cog like you. You straighten your aching back, your hands trembling with exhaustion, your entire body coated in a fine layer of metallic grime. You've made it through the first half of your shift without being flattened, electrocuted, or collapsing from exhaustion. A victory of sorts. But as you shuffle away from your station towards the designated refreshment zone, a new kind of dread bubbles up from your empty stomach. You've seen what this place considers acceptable working conditions. What, in the God Emperor's name, do they consider acceptable food? Your lunch break is a glorious 15-minute window. Not enough time to rest, but just enough time to refuel your aching body before it gives out completely. You shuffle along with the gray-clad throng into the refectorum, a vast, cavernous hall that smells like boiled cabbage and industrial disinfectant. The acoustics are terrible. Every scrape of a metal tray, every cough, every slurping sound echoes off the high, soot-stained ceiling, creating a cacophony of misery. There are no tables for two. There are just long, backless benches bolted to the floor, already packed with exhausted workers who stare blankly into their food, their faces smeared with grime and sweat. You join the queue, a line that moves with grim efficiency. At the front, a servitor, a lobotomized cyborg with a ladle fused to its arm, is mechanically dispensing the day's meal. Forget choosing between a sandwich and a salad. There is no menu. There is only the ration. The servitor slops a single gray-green slab onto your dented metal tray. This is corpse starch. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a highly processed, nutrient-rich foodstuff made from, well, the clue is in the name. The Imperium wastes nothing, especially not its dearly departed citizens. It has the texture of dense, moist sawdust and the flavor of regret. Beside it, the servitor ladles a scoop of what is generously called vegetable matter, a brownish mush that might have been a plant in a past life, now boiled, into submission. To wash this delicacy down, you move to the next station, the water pump. You hold your tin mug under a grimy spigot and pump a handle. A stream of lukewarm, brownish liquid fills your cup. It's recycled water, filtered through ancient, overburdened systems. It tastes of rust, of minerals, and faintly of the pipes it just traveled through. Drinking it is a calculated risk. It might quench your thirst, or it might introduce you to a whole new world of exciting intestinal parasites. But you're thirsty, so you drink. This is your gourmet experience. No artisanal bread, no craft beer, just recycled dead people and water that would fail every health inspection in human history. You find a space on a bench, squeezed between two other workers. No one talks. The energy required for conversation is a luxury no one can afford. The only sound is the rhythmic scrape of spoons on trays and the occasional wet, hacking cough. You eat mechanically, forcing the bland, gritty paste down your throat. It's not about pleasure. It's not even about sating hunger. It's about shoveling enough calories into your system to power you through the next 7 hours of hell. You watch a worker a few rows down suddenly double over, clutching his stomach, his face pale. 2 overseers unceremoniously drag him away. Food poisoning or just another system failure? No one asks. You just eat faster. Your 15 minutes are up before you know it. A klaxon blares, the universal signal for back to work, scum. You leave your tray on a rack, where another servitor will hose it down for the next shift. As you walk back towards the soul-crushing roar of the factory floor, a new kind of weariness sets in. It's not just physical, it's existential. You've been fed like an animal, watered like a machine, and now you're being herded back to your station. You've survived the meal, but your spirit feels a little more digested. The second half of your shift feels even longer than the first. The corpse starch sits like a lead weight in your stomach, a constant, grim reminder of the Imperium's food chain. But as the hours finally, mercifully grind to a close, you might think you're free. You might think you can just go home. Oh no, the Emperor isn't done with you yet. The workday may be over, but your mandatory spiritual duties are just about to begin. The final siren screams, signaling the end of your shift. The colossal machines wind down with a groan of protesting metal, and for the first time in 14 hours, you can almost hear yourself think. A dangerous proposition. Your body is a symphony of aches, your ears are ringing, and your mind is numb with fatigue. All you want is to crawl back to your metal slab of a bed and embrace the sweet oblivion of unconsciousness. Too bad. Your presence is required elsewhere. Attendance is not optional. You're herded out of the manufactorum, not towards the transport cages, but into a different, equally imposing structure, the local Sanctum Imperialis. It's a vast, brutalist cathedral of gray stone and tarnished iron, built to inspire awe and, more importantly, terror. Giant stone aquilas stare down from the facade with unblinking, judgmental eyes. Inside, the air is cold and thick with the cloying scent of incense, a desperate attempt to mask the ever-present stench of the hive. The only light comes from flickering electro-candles, casting long, menacing shadows that dance across carvings of martyred saints and epic, bloody battles. This isn't a place of quiet contemplation. It's the Emperor's courtroom, and you're here for your spiritual audit. This is the hour of adoration, a mandatory ritual to reaffirm your loyalty to the God Emperor of mankind. You pack into the nave with thousands of other exhausted workers, shoulder to shoulder, a sea of gray uniforms and weary faces. At the front, on a raised pulpit, a priest of the Adeptus Ministorum begins to speak. His voice, amplified by crackling voxcasters, booms through the hall. It's not a sermon of hope or comfort. It's a tirade. A blistering, hour-long diatribe about duty, sacrifice, heresy, and the terrible fates that await the unfaithful. He screams about the mutant, the alien, the heretic. He reminds you that your suffering is your prayer, your labor is your worship, and your death in service is your only path to salvation. You stand there, your legs threatening to buckle, and try to look pious. This is critical, because scattered throughout the crowd and lining the walls are the real enforcers of faith. You spot them easily, the grim black-clad figures of the Adeptus Arbites, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, their hands resting on the grips of their combat shotguns. They aren't here to pray, they are here to watch. They scan the crowd, their gaze lingering on anyone not showing the proper level of zealous devotion. Did you yawn? Did your eyes wander? Is that a flicker of dissent in your expression, or just sheer exhaustion? They are the thought police, and they are judge, jury, and executioner. A single misstep, a muttered complaint, an insufficiently fervent "for the Emperor" at the right moment, and you'll be dragged out. Best case scenario, you're sent to a penal legion to die on a forgotten world. Worst case, you just disappear. The priest reaches the crescendo of his sermon, demanding a final prayer of allegiance. The entire congregation roars the response, a wave of sound born more from fear than faith. You shout along with them, your throat raw, your mind screaming for it all to be over. You focus on the giant gilded aquila hanging above the altar, trying to project an aura of unwavering loyalty. This is the most dangerous part of your day. The factory can kill your body, but this place can unmake your entire existence. The sermon finally ends. A moment of tense silence hangs in the air before the crowd is dismissed. You made it. You successfully faked it for another day. As you shuffle out into the artificial gloom of the hive, the priest's words about unseen horrors and lurking threats echo in your ears. You're exhausted, paranoid, and spiritually drained. All that's left is the journey home. But the Arbites aren't the only monsters that patrol the darkness between the factory and your hab block. And the night is just beginning. Freedom, at last. But home is miles away, back across the chasm, and the official transport cages have stopped running for the night. You're on your own now. The path back isn't the high, windswept walkway you took this morning. It's a descent, a journey downwards into the hive's guts, through a labyrinth of dimly lit, narrow maintenance corridors and echoing service tunnels. This is the unofficial city, the network of veins that run between the official arteries, and it has its own unique ecosystem. And you are officially prey. The air gets thicker down here, heavier. The omnipresent smell of rust and smog is now mixed with the scent of leaking sewage, strange chemicals, and something vaguely like cooked meat. The main lights are out, replaced by the erratic flicker of failing power conduits and the lurid chemical glow of gang tags scrawled on the walls. Every shadow seems to writhe. Every drip of water from a leaky pipe sounds like a footstep behind you. This isn't just a walk home, it's a stealth mission through hostile territory. You keep your head down, your pace quick, your hand gripping the small, sharpened piece of scrap metal you keep in your pocket. It's not much of a weapon, but holding it makes you feel slightly less like a victim. This is what passes for nightlife in your world. There are no cozy pubs or cinemas. There are only desperate, dangerous distractions. Through a half-open bulkhead, you see the flickering lights of a ganger-run gambling den, where workers bet their meager thrones on dice games or brutal pit fights between cybernetically enhanced vermin. You could go in, risk your food stipend for the next week on the sliver of a chance of doubling it. But you've seen the losers of those games, left bleeding in the corridors. You keep walking. Further on, a reek of chemical rot signals a goal bar. A shadowy figure in a doorway offers you a sip of rot-gut liquor, a vile home-brewed concoction known affectionately as Wild Snake, or Second Sight. It's cheap, and it's guaranteed to make you forget your miserable life for a few hours. The side effects, however, are less appealing, ranging from temporary blindness to permanent liver failure. It's a tempting offer, a moment of oblivion in exchange for a few years off your already short life. You decline with a shake of your head and hurry past, the seller's raspy laughter following you down the corridor. The real fear, however, isn't the gangers or the poison. It's the unknown. The stories are whispered in the hab blocks and on the factory floor. Stories of things that crawl up from the true underhive, from the sump sea of toxic waste and forgotten machinery at the very bottom. Mutants twisted by pollution, scavengers who hunt for more than just scrap, and darker things, things without names, drawn to the despair that hangs in the air like fog. Was that noise just a pipe venting, or something skittering just out of sight? Is that shadow just a shadow, or is it watching you? Your heart pounds in your chest. The paranoia from the sanctum was a mental exercise. This is a primal, physical fear. Finally, after an eternity of tense navigation, you see it. The stairwell leading back up to your hab level. You scramble up the corroded steps, bursting into the safety of your block, your breath ragged. You slide the flimsy lock on your hab unit door, a gesture that provides more psychological comfort than actual security. Your bunkmates are already there, slumped in their own exhausted comas. The air is still, save for the hum of the recycler and the distant, ceaseless rumble of the hive. You collapse onto your metal slab, not even bothering to remove your filthy uniform. You didn't get stabbed, you didn't get poisoned, you didn't get press-ganged by a cult, and you weren't dragged into the shadows by something with too many limbs. In the 41st millennium, that counts as a good day. You close your eyes, the ringing in your ears a familiar lullaby. For a few precious hours, you can be nothing again. But you know, even as you drift off, that the rest is temporary. The respite is an illusion. In just a few hours, the siren will shriek again. The whole soul-crushing cycle will begin anew. And you will get up and do it all over again. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, this is your life, and there is no escape. It begins not with a scream, but with a promise whispered from a place that should not exist. Imagine the year is 1946. The world above is healing from a global war, binding its wounds with new rules, new gods of the collective, new fears. But far below the storm-tossed waves of the Atlantic, a different world is being born. A lighthouse, a lonely spear of defiance, marks a hidden entrance, a gateway to the impossible, a city at the bottom of the sea. Its name is Rapture, and to see it for the first time is an act of religious terror and awe. The bathysphere descends through miles of black, crushing water, a fragile bubble of air in a realm of monsters. And then, through the portal, it appears. Not a ruin, not a tomb, but a glittering metropolis, a skyline of Art Deco towers that pierce the abyssal gloom, their lights a constellation of human will. This was not a city built to coexist with the ocean. It was built to conquer it, to hold the darkness at bay with sheer, breathtaking arrogance. But what kind of man builds such a place? And more importantly, what was he running from? The architect of this impossible dream was a man named Andrew Ryan. To call him a mere industrialist would be a profound understatement. Ryan was a titan, a prophet of the self, who looked upon the post-war world and saw only parasites. He saw the great man, the artist, the scientist, the thinker, leashed and bled dry by the altruist, the government, and the church. His philosophy was a simple, brutalist sermon. A man is entitled to the sweat of his own brow. For him, the world above was a disease, and he was determined to engineer a cure. Rapture was that cure, a quarantine for greatness. This philosophy was forged into the very steel and brass of the city. The architecture of Rapture is the architecture of belief. Monolithic statues of idealized human forms stand vigil in its plazas, not as gods, but as reminders of what man could be, unshackled. Propaganda posters line the walls, not with nationalist slogans, but with stark philosophical declarations. The great chain of industry pulling humanity upwards, free from the weight of the weak. Every gleaming hall and opulent lounge was designed as a temple to individual achievement. It was a city that whispered a seductive lie into the ear of every person who entered. Here, you are not just free. Here, You are the master of your own universe. But entry into this Eden came at a terrible price. To come to Rapture was to perform a kind of symbolic self-destruction. It required a complete severance from the world above, from family, from country, from history itself. It was a baptism in the cold Atlantic, a shedding of old allegiances to sign a new, unspoken covenant. The city's founding principle, etched into its very entrance, was a defiant creed. No gods or kings, only man. A glorious declaration of freedom, but also a statement of monolithic hubris. It begged a terrifying question. What happens when the artist, the scientist, and the industrialist are declared gods among men, with no one to answer to but their own ambition? The dream of Rapture was, on its surface, perfect, a flawless machine designed to cultivate the best of humanity. But its creator made one fatal miscalculation. He had designed a perfect system, but he had populated it with imperfect beings. The foundation of his city was built on a belief in the supremacy of the individual, yet these individuals were still human, prone to the same old sins of envy, in fear and greed. The city was a paradise, but its citizens were not yet angels. A new solution would be needed, a way to perfect not just the environment, but the man himself. And in the deepest labs of Rapture, a discovery was made, a miracle that promised to grant godhood, but would instead become the engine of the city's damnation. Every utopia is built upon a founding miracle. For Rapture, that miracle was not architectural or philosophical, but biological. The city offered a haven for the mind, but its true promise was the perfection of the flesh. It answered the question left hanging in the abyssal dark. How do you perfect the imperfect beings who populate your paradise? The answer was found not in a laboratory or a factory, but in the gut of a humble sea slug, crawling on the ocean floor. It was a discovery that would elevate Rapture to the heights of godhood before plunging it into an inferno. The discovery was made by Dr. Brigid Tenenbaum, a brilliant but haunted geneticist who saw in these simple creatures something extraordinary. The slugs produced a substance, a kind of unstable stem cell, that could perform biological miracles. It could repair damaged tissue, regenerate cells, and most importantly, graft new genetic information onto a host. She named it Adam. It was the raw clay of life itself, and with it, the citizens of Rapture could become the sculptors of their own bodies. The implications were staggering. An end to disease, an end to aging, the ability to acquire skills not through practice, but through injection. This miracle was quickly commercialized. Andrew Ryan's Rapture was, above all, a city of commerce. Adam was refined and packaged into products called plasmids and gene tonics. Suddenly, the impossible was for sale. A citizen could walk into a gatherer's garden, a sleek Art Deco vending machine, and purchase the ability to shoot fire from their fingertips, to command a swarm of insects, or to move objects with their mind. Artists found new inspiration, their minds sharpened by genetic tonics. Workers could enhance their strength and endurance. It was the ultimate expression of Ryan's philosophy. Man, unmaking and remaking himself into a more perfect being, through the sheer force of his will and the power of the free market. For a time, Rapture experienced a golden age, a renaissance fueled by genetic modification. But a dark logic began to unfold beneath the surface of this miracle. The sea slugs produced only a minuscule amount of Adam. It was enough for research, but not for an entire city of consumers hungry for more power. For Adam to become a true industry, a more efficient factory was needed. Tenenbaum and her business partners, men unburdened by the ethics of the surface world, arrived at a chillingly practical conclusion. The slugs produced Adam when embedded in a living host. To scale production, they needed a host that was symbiotic, regenerative, and available. The raw material for Rapture's genetic arms race was not the slug itself, but the vessel it was placed within. And the true horror of this discovery, the nature of these living factories, was a secret that would be sealed in blood and buried at the very heart of the city's growing nightmare. This was only the first part of the curse. The second was cellular. Adam was a violent and unstable substance. The human body was not designed for such radical, constant reinvention. Every dose taken, every new power acquired, inflicted massive physical trauma on the user's cellular structure. The only thing that could repair this damage was more Adam. It created a terrifying feedback loop. The cure for the side effects was a larger dose of the poison. This led to a devastating citywide addiction. Users began to suffer physical degradation, their features twisting into grotesque parodies. Worse, their minds began to fray, their memories eroding, leaving only the raw, desperate hunger for the next fix. The miracle that promised to make them gods was instead unmaking them as humans. The citizens of Rapture, once the best and brightest of humanity, were now caught in a biological trap. Their quest for perfection had led them to a state of perpetual decay, a cellular hunger that could never be satisfied. The beautiful, shining city was now home to a growing population of desperate addicts, their bodies and minds crumbling. This created a new, predatory economy in the shadows, one that operated outside of Ryan's control. A black market for Adam flourished, promising salvation to those who could afford it. And in a city with no gods, no kings, and no laws, a new power was rising to meet this demand, a power that would challenge Ryan for the very soul of Rapture. A society with no gods or kings is a vacuum, and a vacuum will always be filled. While Andrew Ryan ruled Rapture from his ivory tower, shaping its philosophy, another man was rising from its depths, shaping its soul. This man was the city's perfect predator, the inevitable consequence of a system with no rules. His name was Frank Fontaine, and where Ryan offered a dream, Fontaine offered a deal. It was this fundamental conflict between the rigid ideologue and the master manipulator that would ignite the Civil War and turn Rapture's marble halls into a slaughterhouse. Frank Fontaine was everything Andrew Ryan was not. Ryan was an aristocrat of industry, a man of grand, abstract principles. Fontaine was a creature of the gutter, a con artist who understood the base desires of the common man: fear, hope, and desperation. He arrived in Rapture not as a great mind, but as a fisherman, a persona perfectly crafted to be underestimated. While Ryan was busy building monuments to his ego, Fontaine was building an empire in the shadows. He saw the city's fatal flaw not in its philosophy, but in its market. Ryan had created a city of consumers, and Fontaine would give them what they craved. His first enterprise was a smuggling ring. He became the sole link to the surface world that Ryan had forbidden, bringing in contraband, scriptures, cigars, anything to remind people of the home they'd lost. This gave him wealth and loyalty, but his true genius was in recognizing the power of Adam. Ryan saw Adam as a tool for human perfection. Fontaine saw it as a product that created its own demand. He founded Fontaine Futuristics, a direct competitor to Ryan's own corporate interests, and democratized genetic modification. But his greatest creation was not a plasmid, it was charity. In a city that despised altruism as a weakness, Fontaine opened Fontaine's Home for the Poor, offering shelter and the first taste of Adam to the desperate. It was not kindness. It was a business strategy. He was creating an army of indebted, loyal addicts who saw him not as a criminal, but as a savior. The conflict was inevitable. It was a war of two opposing faiths. Ryan's faith was in the great chain of industry, the idea that every man should pull his own weight. Fontaine's faith was in the power of the desperate, the collective will of the needy. The city became a chessboard for their ambitions. Ryan, the city's founder, watched with growing paranoia as this populist cancer grew within his perfect system. He saw Fontaine not just as a business rival, but as a parasite, the very thing he had built Rapture to escape. He saw the return of the collective, the mob, the altruist, in a new and more terrifying form. The tension simmered, then boiled over. Rapture was no longer big enough for both of their egos. The first shot was fired on New Year's Eve, 1958. Fontaine's forces, genetically enhanced and fanatically loyal, clashed with Ryan's own private security. The Civil War had begun. The gleaming Art Deco paradise became a war zone. Plasmids, once tools of creation and convenience, became weapons of terrifying destruction. The halls echoed with the crackle of electricity and the roar of incinerating fire. The battle was not just for territory, but for the very definition of Rapture. Was it a bastion of individual will, or a jungle where the strongest predator ruled? The fight was brutal, apocalyptic, and it seemingly ended with Fontaine's death in a climactic firefight. Ryan had won. He had cut the head off the snake. But the victory was hollow. The city was scarred, its population traumatized and more addicted than ever. Ryan had defeated his rival, but in doing so, he had been forced to compromise his own ideals. To fight Fontaine's private army, he had to build one of his own. To control the chaos, he began to seize private industries, nationalizing them under his direct authority, an act of collectivism that spat in the face of his own philosophy. He had won the battle, but he had lost the war for Rapture's soul, and he failed to understand one crucial thing. A man like Fontaine, a creature of pure persona, doesn't truly die. He merely changes shape. The war was over, but the poison was now deep in the city's bloodstream, and the real monsters were just beginning to wake up. The war between Ryan and Fontaine left Rapture a graveyard, but its ghosts did not rest. They walked the dripping halls, their footsteps echoing a mournful, chattering madness. These are the citizens Ryan sought to save and Fontaine sought to control. They are the splicers. To look upon a splicer is to witness the final, agonizing chapter of Rapture's promise. They are not merely insane. They are a living monument to a failed utopia, their bodies and minds shattered by the very substance that was meant to make them perfect. To understand them is to listen to the last whispers of a drowned world. Who were they before the fall? They were the chosen. The artists who came to Rapture to paint without censorship, the scientists eager to research without ethical restraint, the architects and engineers who built the impossible city. They were believers. They injected the promise of Adam directly into their veins, embracing the genetic arms race with fervor. They enhanced their bodies for labor, for art, for vanity, for war. But the Civil War broke something inside them. It was a maelstrom of violence and terror that, when combined with rampant Adam abuse, acted as a catalyst for a horrifying transformation. Their bodies, already ravaged by unstable genetics, began to twist into monstrous forms. Their minds, already frayed by addiction, snapped completely. The splicers are tragic figures because they are trapped in a phantom loop of their former lives. The thuggish splicers, with their lead pipes and brutish rage, were once the city's laborers and construction workers, their bodies grotesquely swollen with strength-enhancing tonics. The Houdini splicers, who teleport in whispers of red smoke, were the city's artists and magicians, obsessed with a beauty and grace their twisted forms can no longer achieve. The spider splicers crawl on ceilings, their bodies contorted into arachnid forms, a horrific evolution born from a desire for agility and stealth. They cling to the tattered remnants of their past identities, wearing masquerade ball masks to hide their deformities, humming old show tunes and endlessly reenacting fragments of their shattered memories. They are not just monsters, they are people, locked inside a prison of their own flesh. The deepest insight into their tragedy comes from the voices they left behind. All over Rapture, audio diaries lie scattered like fallen leaves, intimate confessions recorded in the final moments before the madness took hold. A musician, lamenting how the gene tonics that once helped him compose now make his hands tremble uncontrollably. A housewife, excitedly describing a new plasmid that helps with chores, her voice betraying a desperate edge of addiction. A concerned doctor documenting the cellular decay and psychological erosion in his patients, realizing with dawning horror that there is no cure. Listening to these diaries is like conducting a seance. We hear the hope turn to desperation, the desperation to paranoia, and the paranoia to the mindless, violent rage that now defines them. This transformation reveals the true cost of Rapture's freedom. In a city with no social support, no public health, and no safety net, there was nothing to catch the falling. The descent into Splicerdom was a private, isolating horror. They were abandoned by Ryan's ideology, which saw their weakness as a personal failure, and preyed upon by Fontaine's system, which saw their addiction as a source of profit. They are the human debris of a philosophical war, left to rot in the dark. Their existence is a constant screaming testament to the failure of Andrew Ryan's great experiment. But the Splicers are more than just a tragic consequence. They are a symptom of a much deeper sickness within the city. Their desperate, insatiable hunger for Adam became the central driving force of Rapture's post-war economy. And the city, in its depraved ingenuity, developed a new, monstrous system to satisfy that hunger. A system that required a constant supply of fresh Adam. This led to the creation of something far more terrible than the Splicers. It led to the creation of living gods and walking demons, an unholy trinity at the very heart of Rapture's damnation. In the ruins of Rapture, amidst the chattering of the Splicers, there is a sound that cuts through the madness. It is the haunting song of a little girl, followed by the deep, mournful groan of metallic footsteps. This is the sound of the city's dark heart, still beating. It is the sound of the system that was created to solve Adam's scarcity, a solution so monstrous it represents the final, absolute moral collapse of Andrew Ryan's dream. This is the story of the Little Sisters, their fearsome guardians, the Big Daddies, and the horrifying ritual that kept the last drops of life flowing through a dying city. The problem was simple. The Splicers needed Adam to survive, but the sea slugs that produced it were gone. A new, more efficient source was required. Dr. Tenenbaum, the original discoverer of Adam, engineered the solution. She found that by implanting the Adam-producing slug into the stomach of a human host, the host could be converted into a living factory, capable of ingesting the residual Adam from the city's dead and recycling it. But not just any host would do. For maximum yield and symbiosis, the host needed to be a young girl. And so, the Little Sisters were created. They were taken from Fontaine's orphanages, their minds wiped, their bodies horrifically repurposed. They were no longer children. They were walking resource nodes, tools designed for a single sacred purpose: to gather. To the Splicers, these girls were salvation, walking miracles containing the substance they craved more than life itself. They became the most valuable commodity in Rapture, and therefore, the most hunted. A lone little sister would be torn apart in seconds. She needed a protector. This led to the second part of this unholy creation, the Big Daddy. These were the ultimate tragic figures of Rapture. They were men, criminals, political prisoners, volunteers who sold their bodies to Fontaine futuristics, who underwent an irreversible procedure. Their bodies were grafted directly into massive armored diving suits, their skin and organs fused with steel and brass. Their minds were systematically destroyed and reprogrammed with a single, absolute imperative: protect the little sister. The bond between a Big Daddy and a little sister is one of the most disturbing and profound relationships in this fallen world. It is not one of love or family, but of pure chemical conditioning. The Big Daddy sees not a repurposed child, but a figure of immense importance that he must protect at all costs. The little sister, in her own fractured reality, sees not a walking tomb of a man, but a knight in shining armor, her Mr. Bubbles. Together they roam the halls of Rapture, a grotesque parody of a father and daughter. She sings and skips, pointing out the angels, the dead bodies, so she can extract their Adam with a massive syringe. He follows, his drill whirring, his footsteps a booming metronome of death for anyone who dares to come too close. He is her warden, her bodyguard, and her slave. This trinity, the hunter, the hunted, and the protector, became the engine of Rapture's final economy. It was a ritual of survival. The little sister harvests the atom, the big daddy protects her from the splicers, and the splicers, in their desperation, would throw themselves at the big daddy's drill for a chance to get to the girl. It is a perfect, self-sustaining cycle of violence and predation. It is the logical endpoint of a society that values acquisition above all else. They had taken the most innocent members of their society and turned them into living tools, and they had taken men and turned them into mindless beasts of burden to protect that horrific investment. This was the true face of Rapture, hidden beneath the philosophy and the Art Deco grandeur. It was a city that consumed its own children to survive. The creation of the Little Sisters and Big Daddies was not an act of madness. It was an act of cold, calculated industrial logic. It was the moment Rapture stopped being a failed utopia and became a functioning hell. And Andrew Ryan, the man who built this city to escape the parasites of the world, now presided over a kingdom that practiced a form of ritualistic sacrifice. He had created his own gods and monsters, but in doing so, he had proven that his entire philosophy was a lie. And faced with this ultimate failure, the great individualist would resort to the ultimate tool of the collective he so despised: total control. A man builds a city on one single luminous idea. A man chooses, a slave obeys. He builds it to be a fortress of free will, a sanctuary from the chains of tyranny. But what does that man do when his own creation turns against him? What happens when the free will he championed becomes the very force that tears his kingdom apart? For Andrew Ryan, founder and king of Rapture, the answer was the ultimate and most tragic of ironies. To save his city from chaos, he would commit the greatest sin against his own philosophy. He would take away the one thing Rapture was built to protect: choice. The Civil War had left Ryan a changed man. He had defeated Fontaine, but the victory felt like a bitter defeat. His city was in ruins, its citizens devolved into monstrous splicers, and a new, shadowy power was consolidating around Fontaine's old assets. Ryan became a prisoner in his own palace, a paranoid, isolated ruler, watching his dream curdle into a nightmare. He saw betrayal in every shadow and conspiracy in every whisper. The man who had preached absolute freedom now saw it as the city's greatest vulnerability. He concluded that the problem was not his philosophy, but the flawed, corruptible will of the people. His solution was as brilliant as it was monstrous. Working with a rogue geneticist, the duplicitous Yi Su-chong, Ryan began to research a way to override human will. The project centered on exploiting the very atom that had destroyed his populace. They discovered that through a combination of genetic conditioning and specific pheromones, it was possible to create mental triggers, hypnotic suggestions that an atom-infused subject could not disobey. It was the birth of mind control, a technology that could turn any citizen into a puppet, a sleeper agent waiting for a command. This was Ryan's final, desperate gambit to restore order. He would reassert control not through inspiration, but through compulsion. The culmination of this research was a single, innocuous phrase, a trigger so simple, so polite, that it could be woven into any conversation without suspicion. The phrase was, "Would you kindly?" Implanted into a genetically conditioned subject, these three words were not a request. They were an unbreakable command. They bypassed reason, morality, and self-preservation. With this tool, Ryan could neutralize his enemies, enforce his will, and create the perfect obedient citizen he had failed to cultivate through ideology alone. It was the ultimate act of hypocrisy. The great champion of individualism had forged the ultimate weapon of the collective, a tool that rendered the individual meaningless. This technology transformed Ryan from a philosopher king into a tyrant in the purest sense of the word. He began using mind control to eliminate political rivals, to silence dissent, and to maintain a fragile grip on the city's remaining infrastructure. The freedom of Rapture became a carefully constructed illusion. The great chain of industry that once symbolized upward mobility was now, quite literally, a chain. This was the final, pathetic stage of his ideology. A belief so rigid that it preferred the illusion of success through control over the reality of failure through freedom. He had become the very thing he had sworn to destroy, a ruler who believed he had the right to the minds and bodies of others. The creation of the "Would you kindly" command was more than just a strategic decision. It was Andrew Ryan's philosophical suicide. He had looked into the abyss of his own failure and blinked. He chose the slave's path, obedience to a dying dream, enforced by chains he himself had forged. But he had forgotten about the snake in his garden. Frank Fontaine, the master manipulator believed to be long dead, had not only survived, but had co-opted this very research. While Ryan planned to use mind control to preserve his city, Fontaine would use it for a much more personal, far more elegant purpose. He would turn Ryan's ultimate weapon against him, crafting a key designed to open any lock, walk any hall, and deliver a final, poetic justice directly to the feet of Rapture's creator. In the end, Andrew Ryan faces his creation. Not a city, but a man. A man guided by a simple phrase, "Would you kindly?" who has walked through Rapture like a ghost of vengeance. And in his final moments, the philosopher king offers one last sermon, not with words, but with an act of supreme, horrifying defiance. He orders his own demise, proving that even in death, a man can choose. With his end, the war for Rapture is finally over. The Titans have fallen. The dream is dead. And all that is left is the silence of the abyss, and a city-sized tomb filled with the echoes of what went wrong. What is the legacy of Rapture? It is more than the story of a failed city. It is a cautionary tale etched in rusted steel and broken glass. It stands as a terrifying monument to the paradox of the human condition. It was a city built on the magnificent premise that man is a giant, capable of achieving anything. But it was destroyed by the simple, undeniable truth that man is also fragile, prone to the ancient temptations of power, greed, and fear. Rapture did not fail because its ideals were wrong, but because they were too pure for the imperfect creatures who tried to live by them. It was a perfect equation that forgot to account for the chaos of the human heart. The halls of Rapture are now a museum of this failure. The Art Deco architecture, once a symbol of progress and beauty, now serves as a gilded cage for the mad. The vending machines that once offered genetic miracles now dispense the very tools of the city's destruction. The propaganda posters promising freedom and power now read like a bitter joke, their slogans mocking the grotesque splicers who shuffle past them. The city is a ghost story, told not by spirits, but by the environment itself. Every leaking corridor, every flickering light, every distant, sorrowful whale song that penetrates the hull is a reminder of the colossal ambition and the even more colossal failure that occurred here. The fall of Rapture serves as a chilling warning that echoes far beyond its watery grave. It asks a deeply uncomfortable question: is any utopia truly safe from itself? Andrew Ryan sought to build a paradise free from the perceived evils of the world: government, religion, altruism. But in his desperate attempt to amputate the worst of humanity, he also removed the very things that hold society together: compassion, regulation, and a sense of shared responsibility. He created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, new monsters were born, spawned directly from the unyielding pursuit of his own ideals. The city's killer was not an external enemy, but a poison that grew from within. Rapture is a ghost that still haunts us. It is the chilling whisper in the back of our minds that suggests that our greatest strengths, our ambition, our intellect, our drive to create, are inextricably linked to our most destructive impulses. The city at the bottom of the ocean is a testament to the idea that paradise, when pursued with absolute, uncompromising fervor, will inevitably forge its own hell. It remains sealed in the crushing blackness, a drowned dream, posing one final, terrifying question to the world above. How much pressure can any foundation take before it cracks? And when it does, what kind of monsters will come crawling out of the wreckage? Before it was a name whispered in fear, before it wore a crown of rust and steel, it was a titan of stone, sleeping under the indifferent gaze of the Australian sun. The Citadel was not born of human hands or ambition. It was born of geological time, a creature of tectonic fury and patient erosion, thrusting itself from the flat, red earth as if to defy the emptiness of the horizon. For untold ages, it existed in a state of profound and stoic silence, a cathedral built by nature itself, its three great spires like fingers reaching for a sky that offered no rain, no relief, only a relentless burning clarity. It was a landmark without travelers, a monument to nothing but its own enduring presence. In those ancient days, its only companions were the wind and the sun. The wind was its sculptor, carving new lines into its face with each passing century, whispering mournful songs through its canyons and crevices. The sun was its constant tormentor, baking its stone skin until it shimmered in the heat, yet the Citadel remained unbowed. It watched as the world around it changed in ways no human could comprehend. It felt the subtle shifts in the planet's breath, the slow retreat of ancient oceans, the rise and fall of strange, forgotten beasts. It was a silent witness, its memory etched not in scripture or song, but in the very strata of its being. And deep within its stone heart, it guarded a secret, a treasure of unimaginable worth. For a mountain to hold a secret is one thing, but for a mountain in the heart of a dying desert to hold this one, it was a miracle waiting for a prophet or a thief. For deep within its stone veins, hidden from the desperate, sun-scorched world, it cradled the lifeblood of the earth, the aqua cola, a vast, pristine aquifer, a liquid ghost of a greener, gentler time. This was the Citadel's soul. While its exterior was a mask of harsh, barren rock, its core was a sanctuary of impossible purity. The water was a promise, a covenant the earth had made with itself. And the Citadel was its chosen guardian. It held this life-giving essence in a cold, dark embrace, protecting it from the creeping sickness of the world above. As humanity's age of marvels reached its crescendo, the Citadel remained aloof, a silent observer to the distant glow of cities it would never know. It felt the tremors of their industry, the faint taste of their ambition carried on the wind, but it did not care. Its purpose was older, deeper. Then came the fall. The Citadel did not see the flash of fire on the horizon, but it felt the world's final shuddering gasp. The sky, once a brilliant blue, turned to a bruised, perpetual twilight. The air grew thick with the ghosts of burnt fuel and lost hope. The silence that returned was different now. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of absence. The world had died, and the Citadel was now a tombstone for a civilization that had choked on its own progress. It stood over a new landscape, a wasteland of sand and sorrow, populated by the desperate, scavenging remnants of mankind. Yet, as the world withered, the secret in its heart only grew more precious. The life it held within became the last prayer of a godless age. It waited. The unsleeping mountain, the great stone guardian, felt a change in the wasteland's rhythm. The whispers that traveled on the wind were no longer about the past, but about survival. They were whispers of thirst, of desperation, of a legend, a fortress of rock that held the key to life. For the first time in its long existence, the Citadel felt the pull of human desire, a focused, hungry need directed at its very core. It was no longer just a feature of the landscape. It was becoming a destination, a symbol. It had been a silent god for eons, but a god is nothing without believers. And as the desperate crawled across the dead plains, a different kind of man was coming too, one who saw not a sanctuary, but an engine of power. The mountain's long, primordial dream was about to be broken by the shriek of metal and the roar of a tyrant's will. The silence of ages was shattered not by a whisper, but by the roar of an engine. A new consciousness had arrived in the wasteland, a mind that did not see the Citadel as a wonder to be revered, but as a beast to be broken. This was Joe Moore, a man forged in the crucible of the old world's resource wars, a colonel who saw the landscape not with a poet's eye, but with a strategist's gaze. When he first laid eyes upon the 3 stone spires, he did not see a natural monument. He saw a throne, a pulpit, and a vault, all in one. He understood the mountain's secret almost immediately, not as a miracle, but as an opportunity. The water within was not just life, it was the ultimate currency in a world dying of thirst. It was a foundation upon which an empire could be built. The unsleeping mountain had finally met the man who would give it a new, terrible name. The taming began with a violation. The Citadel, which had withstood eons of wind and sun, now felt a pain it had never known. The scream of industrial drills, relics of the fallen world, tore into its ancient flesh. Its stone body, which had never been touched by anything more violent than the wind, shuddered as the first drill bit into its flank, penetrating deeper and deeper towards its sacred, liquid heart. The sound was a desecration, a mechanical shriek that drowned out the soft whisper of the wind, replacing the mountain's quiet dignity with the clamor of conquest. When the drill finally pierced the aquifer, the first gout of water that erupted was not a blessing, but a cry of capture. The mountain's soul, the pure, pristine water, was now being siphoned, its freedom taken. The Citadel was being bled, its life force redirected to serve another's will. A new anatomy was brutally grafted onto its old one. The elegant, natural lines of the rock were scarred by platforms of rust and scavenged steel. Massive chains and gears were bolted into its sides like crude iron ligaments designed to hoist men and machines. A tangled web of pipes and valves was wrapped around it, a circulatory system of metal and rust, turning the fortress into a grotesque cyborg of nature and industry. Immortan Joe, as he now called himself, was remaking the mountain in his own image, pragmatic, brutal, and stripped of all sentiment. The Citadel was no longer just a passive geological feature. It was being given a function, a mechanical heart that beat to the rhythm of a tyrant's command. The water, once resting in silent darkness, was now forced through channels, controlled by levers, and weaponized by its new master. The transformation was complete. The unsleeping mountain was dead, and in its place, the Citadel was born. A fortress machine, a symbol of absolute control. It now had a voice, a terrifying thunder that would define it for a generation. It was the groan of the great lift, the roar of the water pumps, and, most importantly, the cataclysmic sound of the main sluice gate opening. This was the Citadel's new proclamation, a controlled deluge released upon the desperate masses below, a spectacle of power that turned life-giving water into a tool of subjugation. The Citadel had been given a purpose, a voice, and a master. Its spirit was no longer its own. It was now shackled to the man who sat on its highest peak. But as the fortress settled into its new role as the heart of the wasteland, it could not yet know the true nature of the society that would grow within it, or the gilded green prison that was about to be cultivated at its very summit. With its spirit conquered and its body remade, the Citadel entered its grim prime. It was no longer a wild, silent god, but the thrumming, breathing heart of a new civilization built on a foundation of scarcity and fear. It became the capital of the wasteland, the epicenter of Immortan Joe's dominion, a name that echoed across the blasted plains, synonymous with life and death. The Citadel learned a new rhythm, a cruel and steady pulse. It was the rhythm of the warboys chanting their devotion, the clatter of the mechanics in the workshops, and the desperate cries of the wretched, the swarm of humanity clinging to its base, their eyes eternally fixed on the spouts from which their salvation or damnation would flow. The fortress had found its purpose, its dark triumph. It stood not just as a bastion of power, but as a living deity in a world starved for gods, demanding worship in exchange for a few precious drops of life. At its peak, a strange and beautiful cancer began to grow. High above the filth and desperation, where the air was cleaner and the sun felt gentler, Joe cultivated a paradise. He commanded the creation of a vast hydroponic garden and a magnificent greenhouse, both fed by the purest water drawn from the Citadel's heart. This was the Citadel's gilded cage, a lush, green jewel set atop a crown of suffering. Its body became a monument to obscene inequality, while its lower levels were a monochrome world of dust, rust, and misery. Its summit was a riot of vibrant life. The scent of fresh soil and blooming flora, a fragrance lost to the rest of the world, perfumed the air in this exclusive sanctuary. The Citadel now possessed a profound and tragic duality. Its feet were planted in the hell of the common man, while its head was in a heaven reserved for one. This green sanctuary was not just for show. It held the most prized possessions of the Citadel's master, the 5 wives. They were the human embodiment of the fortress's own internal conflict. Like the vibrant plants in the greenhouse, they were beautiful, cherished, and utterly captive. They lived within the Citadel's most beautiful chambers, yet these chambers were a prison. The fortress became their warden, its stone walls the unbreachable barrier between them and freedom. It heard their silent prayers for escape, felt the soft tread of their feet in corridors of privilege and despair. The Citadel, once a guardian of pure water, was now the guardian of stolen innocence, its very structure complicit in the tyrant's most personal cruelties. It was both a fortress against the outside world and a prison for those trapped within its highest echelons. And so, the Citadel reigned, a complex and tormented soul. It was a source of life, dispensing water to keep its worshippers alive. It was a factory of death, birthing fleets of monstrous vehicles and legions of pale, half-life warboys who saw glory in a meaningless end. It was a palace of breathtaking beauty and a dungeon of unimaginable sorrow. Its identity was a paradox, a monument of contradictions. It projected an image of absolute, unshakable strength, its 3 spires a symbol of indomitable power across the wasteland. Yet, as it stood in its terrible glory, it was blind to the slow, quiet poison spreading through its own veins. For in the heart of its most beautiful, most secure chamber, a seed of rebellion was taking root, a whisper of defiance that would soon threaten to crack the very stone of its foundation. For years, the Citadel believed itself to be eternal, its structure as unyielding as the tyrant who ruled from its summit. It had settled into its role, its rhythms becoming a grim and predictable liturgy of power. The groan of the lifts, the roar of the engines, the desperate pleas from below. These were the sounds of its life, a life it assumed would never change. It was a perfect machine of oppression, every gear and piston working in concert to maintain the status quo. The fortress felt invincible, its stone skin impenetrable, its iron will absolute. But power, like stone, is not immune to erosion. The most dangerous threats do not always announce themselves with the blast of an engine, but with the silence of a determined heart. The Citadel was about to learn that the deepest cracks can form from the inside out. The first tremor was not geological, but emotional. It originated in the gilded cage, the green sanctuary that was meant to be the symbol of the Citadel's triumph. The source of this tremor was a woman, its most trusted and fearsome protector, the Imperator Furiosa. She was a creation of the Citadel as much as any warboy, her body scarred and her spirit tempered in the fires of its brutal society. She was the fortress's own blade, honed and sharpened by Joe himself. Yet, within her, a different kind of strength was growing. Not the blind fanaticism of the warboys, but the resilient, unyielding force of memory. She remembered a world beyond the Citadel's shadow, a green place that was not a prison. This memory became a corrosive agent, slowly eating away at the loyalty that bound her to the tyrant. The Citadel, in all its stone and steel arrogance, could not feel this subtle shift, the quiet hardening of a will that was about to defy it. The whispers began to spread, carried not on the wind, but in the shared glances and silent tears of the 5 wives. They were the Citadel's most precious secret, its promise of a pure lineage. But they were also its greatest vulnerability. In their shared captivity, they nurtured a dream of freedom, a radical idea in a place built to extinguish all hope. Their defiance was a quiet, growing melody of dissent, played in the very heart of the fortress. The walls of their luxurious prison, which had been designed to keep the world out, now incubated a rebellion that would tear the Citadel apart. The fortress had given them shelter, food, and what its master called protection, but it had made a fatal error. It had given them each other. And in that unity, they forged a weapon more powerful than any chrome-plated V8 engine. The Citadel was a living body, and it was beginning to show symptoms of a sickness it could not diagnose. There was a tension in the air, a dissonance in its daily rhythm. The loyalty of its subjects, once as solid as the rock it stood on, was becoming brittle. The warboys still chanted their creeds, the wretched still begged for water, but an undercurrent of change was stirring. It was in the way Furiosa looked at the horizon, the way the wives spoke in hushed tones when their guards were out of earshot. The fortress, a master of control, was slowly losing its grip on the very souls it had imprisoned. It stood tall and defiant against the wasteland, unaware that its greatest battle would not be fought against an invading army, but against the 5 women and the Imperator, who were about to stage the most audacious prison break in history, an act that would feel to the Citadel like its own heart being ripped from its chest. The day the Citadel's heart was torn out began like any other. The sun rose, casting its pale, sickly light over the wasteland. The familiar sounds of the fortress waking echoed through its canyons. The clank of chains, the cough of an engine, the low murmur of the waking masses. The Citadel felt the familiar weight of the war rig, its most powerful appendage, being prepared in the belly of the main spire. It was a routine supply run, a mundane circulation of its own lifeblood, guzzling, and mother's milk. The fortress felt no premonition, no sense of the impending violation. It trusted its Imperator. Furiosa was its own hardened extension, a limb it had always controlled. It did not know that this limb was about to sever itself, taking with it the very future the Citadel was built to protect. The moment of betrayal was a quiet, sickening lurch. When the war rig, instead of thundering down the well-worn track to Gastown, veered sharply off course and charged into the hostile, uncharted desert, the Citadel felt a jolt of pure confusion. It was a neurological shock, a message from one of its extremities that defied all logic and command. The alarm that blared from its peak was not just a sound, it was a scream of disbelief and sudden, agonizing pain. The sight of the rig carving a new path toward the rising sun was an act of open defiance that struck the fortress to its core. This was not an attack from the outside. This was a self-inflicted wound, a mutiny from within its own body. And the realization of what and who was aboard that rig transformed the pain into pure, unadulterated fury. The wives were gone. The gilded cage was empty. The future, the pure lineage that was the entire purpose of its master's reign, had been stolen from its most secure vault. The Citadel felt a hollowness spread from its summit downwards, a spiritual evisceration. It was as if the green, living paradise at its peak had instantly withered and died, leaving behind only a barren, violated chamber. This was the ultimate treason. Immortan Joe's rage became the Citadel's own. The fortress, which had for so long projected an aura of calm, unshakable control, was thrown into a state of violent chaos. Its entire being was galvanized by a single, primal purpose: retrieve what was stolen. The Citadel had been plundered of its most precious treasure, and its response was to unleash hell upon the world. The fortress convulsed, disgorging its full military might in a torrent of noise, smoke, and chrome. The gates, once sealed for protection, were thrown open for pursuit. Engines that had lain dormant roared to life, and the war boys, its pale, fanatical sons, poured out like antibodies rushing to a wound. The Citadel emptied itself, its focus narrowing to the single, desperate point of the fleeing war rig. It threw its children, its resources, its very identity into the chase, a furious projection of its master's will. The entire wasteland became a battleground, the stage for the Citadel's desperate attempt to reclaim its stolen heart. As the chase thundered across the plains, the great stone fortress stood diminished, its chambers echoing with an unfamiliar emptiness, its gaze fixed on the dust cloud on the horizon, waiting to see if it would be made whole again, or if it would be left permanently broken. In the aftermath of the great chase, a strange and heavy silence fell upon the Citadel. The fury of its pursuit had faded into a distant echo across the sand, leaving the fortress feeling hollowed out, its limbs scattered across the wasteland. It stood in a state of suspended animation, a body without a will, waiting for a signal from its master. It had poured its strength, its sons, and its very purpose into the desert. And now it was left with only the wretched at its feet, and the unsettling quiet in its high chambers. The fortress had known the silence of ages before Joe, but this was a new kind of silence, one filled with the tension of an unanswered question. It was the silence of a held breath, an entire kingdom waiting for its king to return and declare victory or defeat. The return came not as a triumphant procession, but as a ghost creeping back through the dawn. The war rig, the very instrument of the Citadel's violation, was the first thing to crest the horizon. For a moment, a flicker of hope might have stirred in the fortress's iron heart. Perhaps the rebellion had been crushed. Perhaps its master was aboard, his property reclaimed, his order restored. But there was something wrong with the rig's approach. It moved with a quiet, solemn purpose, not the arrogant thunder of a conquering hero. As it drew closer, the Citadel could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The few remaining warboys who guarded its gates felt it too. A change in the wind, a scent of something utterly alien to their world, the scent of finality. The moment the mask was held aloft, the Citadel's world broke. The grotesque, skeletal grin of Immortan Joe's respirator, brandished not by the tyrant himself but by the rebel Furiosa, was a symbol that shattered the fortress's reality. It was a message more powerful than any engine roar or gunshot. The god was dead. The master was gone. For the Citadel, this was a seismic event, a schism in the very bedrock of its identity. The consciousness that had tamed it, shaped it, and given it a terrible purpose for decades was extinguished in an instant. A collective shockwave rippled through the fortress, from the highest platform down to the lowest cavern. The war boys, the fanatical sons, were suddenly orphans. The mechanics in the workshops, the indoctrinated children, they were all untethered, their faith collapsing like a rotted scaffold. The fortress had lost its mind. For one terrifying silent moment, the Citadel was adrift. It was a body without a head, a machine without an operator. Its power was immense, its resources vast, but its will was gone. The chains of its servitude had been broken, but it did not yet know what freedom meant. The great stone structure, which had been a tool, a weapon, and a prison, was suddenly just a place again. The groaning lifts fell silent. The thrumming pumps quieted. It held its breath, its immense potential energy now inert, waiting for a new command that did not come. The fall of the tyrant was not a fiery explosion, but a sudden, deafening silence. The Citadel was unchained, its soul returning to its own stone body for the first time in generations, looking down upon the chaos and wondering what new form, what new life, it was about to be given. With the tyrant dead and his symbol of power discarded, a new presence ascended the Citadel's heights. It was not the swagger of a conqueror or the stomp of an oppressor, but the weary, determined steps of its own returning children. Furiosa, the wives, and the broken man named Max. They reached the summit not as new masters, but as conduits for a change the fortress had been secretly yearning for. As Furiosa met the gaze of the remaining warboys and the countless eyes of the wretched below, the Citadel felt a new consciousness take hold. This was not a transfer of power in the old way. It was the dawn of an entirely new idea. The fortress, which had been a vessel for one man's greed, was about to become a vessel for the people's hope. The first act of this new era was a baptism. With a groan of protesting metal and a collective act of will, the survivors worked the great levers, not to taunt the thirsty, but to set them free. The main sluice gate, for so long a symbol of cruel, calculated control, was thrown wide open, and the water came. It was not the controlled, temporary trickle of the past, but a torrential, unrestrained flood of pure life. The Citadel unleashed its very soul, pouring the sacred contents of its heart out onto the desperate, upturned faces of the masses. The water cascaded down its stone flanks, washing away the grime of the old regime, cleansing the rock of its long-held shame. This was not a transaction, it was a gift. In that moment, the fortress was no longer a prison or a tool of fear. It was a fountain. It was a miracle. The sound of the rushing water was the sound of its own liberation. A new ecosystem of life began to bloom at its base. The wretched, for so long kept at a distance, were welcomed in. They surged forward, not to grovel, but to drink, to wash, to live. The Citadel's lowest levels, once a place of dust and despair, were transformed into a sanctuary. The fortress felt the weight of thousands of new inhabitants, not as a burden, but as a purpose renewed. It was finally fulfilling the promise it had held in its heart for millennia, to be a guardian of life, a provider for all. The green paradise on its summit was no longer a gilded cage for a chosen few, but the beginning of a new way of life for everyone. Its purpose was no longer to project power outward, but to cultivate life within. And so, the Citadel began its new biography. Its scars remained, the drill holes, the rusted platforms, the memory of the tyrant, but they were no longer symbols of oppression. They were the weathered marks of a long and difficult life, a testament to its resilience and its capacity for change. It stands now not as a monument to a single man, but as a living testament to the idea that even the most corrupted soul can be redeemed, that even the most formidable fortress can learn to open its gates. It continues to watch over the wasteland, but its gaze is different. It is the steady, nurturing gaze of a true guardian, its three spires reaching for the sky not in defiance, but in quiet promise. The Citadel, the unsleeping mountain, the fortress of fear, had finally found its true name: home.